I can feel the need for speed. Welcome to episode 62 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all once again for joining me here on this Friday, just about evening in New York. If you're checking out episode 62 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, don't forget to click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching up the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or the other platforms, and you're enjoying the content, don't forget to click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So as the opening would lead you to believe, episode 62 will focus on Tom Cruise. Thomas Maypother Cruise III, I believe, was his birth name. And I haven't really spoken of him much in all these episodes. When I've discussed Stanley Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut, of course, he was mentioned, but really only briefly. So that's the thing. There's a lot of discussion, and people such as Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese and Francis Coppola, a lot of the old heads, they talk about how the emphasis, for example, on comic book movies takes away the old school movie star or the lure or the appeal of the old school movie star. Because, as Tarantino has said, I love Chris Evans, but Captain America can really be played by anybody. Tom Cruise is one of the last great movie stars. And, you could argue that, and I have argued, and this is another hill I'll go down on, I would always say Clint Eastwood. And not just because he's 32, 33 years older right now, 32 years older than Tom Cruise at present. I'll go down on that hill that Clint he's alone. There's nobody like Clint. But in a different context, there's nobody like Tom Cruise, there are a lot of similarities between their careers. In the case of Cruise, he's been literally at the top of the mountain almost without fail for more than 4 decades. Can't quite say that about Clint, because Clint had moments where he had significant failures of movies that there were very high hopes for. There's almost none of that in the career of Tom Cruise. So the first movie that Cruise starred in, where he's in The Outsiders, he's in the movie Taps, but he's not really the man, and until really Risky Business, which again is now a movie that is more than 40 years old. It came out in 1983. And when we think of his career, it's easy to dismiss. He made a lot of action movies where, for example, he took a lot of heat with Jack Reacher a dozen years ago because the character in the books looks like Alan Ritchson, the guy who plays him in the movies, and Tom Cruise is a smaller guy. And there are movies where he does things that don't seem possible for somebody of his, normal person size. But he does it with such style and such conviction. I've never seen a Tom Cruise performance where I didn't get the sense that he was giving it everything he had. And that's more than I could say for a lot of other people in the business. The phrase that used to be used was, he's just collecting a paycheck. I have never gotten the sense that Tom Cruise was collecting a paycheck. And, a lot of people like to point to his kind of extended cameo as Les Grossman in Tropic Thunder to sort of further this, that he's somebody who was thought to take himself too seriously. The thing is, he's great in interviews, always has been, good with fans, signing autographs, interacting, as long as people don't do stupid shit like a number of years ago somebody sprayed water on him just because reasons. But when he did that, especially after the kind of controversy with War of the Worlds, well, the controversy wasn't with the movie, it was with Scientology and almost getting into an argument with Matt Lauer on television about the history of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and all of this, psychiatry. But Tropic Thunder showed he is somebody who is self-aware, and he has a sense of humor. And when he wants to be funny, he can be really funny. He can do it all. But what I was saying about Cruise and Eastwood specifically is whether or not Tom has ever talked about this, I don't know. Don't read every interview. But Clint was one of the first stars in Hollywood to form his own production company so he could do things somewhat outside of the so-called studio system, when Clint had a shingle at Warner Brothers. And Tom Cruise is another individual who formed his own production company. I'm not sure which was the first film, but at the time, his producing partner, Paula Wagner. And I know that he was very involved in the actual production, not from the movie star perspective, of the first Mission Impossible. So I feel like that might have been the first movie. Again, he was in his early 30s at the time, it's many years ago now. The first Mission Impossible wrapped production literally 28 years ago. They were showing the trailers for that at the end of 1995. You know, I remember went to see the movie Jumanji with Robin Williams, not one of his best, the original 1995 Jumanji. But man, the teaser trailer for Mission Impossible, holy shit, couldn't wait. So the idea is that for all the ups and downs, and again, not so much cinematically, but in his personal life, he married and divorced, he had bad feelings with his first wife, Mimi Rogers. It looked like they had a great thing, that didn't work out. And then with Nicole Kidman, the kind of stuff that their characters go through in Eyes Wide Shut may have had some parallels to real life because they split up not long after. And then the Katie Holmes thing in the mid-2000s, that was unfortunate. So despite all the money, despite all the fame, I still see him as someone I can root for. Even with the, if you want to call it wackiness with Scientology, I don't know, I see him as human. I don't see him as this robotic kind of, he's certainly a control freak and a perfectionist. You know, and Matt Damon's so good at telling stories about other people in Hollywood. He just doesn't give a shit. You know, Damon's at that point where, hey, if you don't like that I'm telling a story of a conversation we had in 1997, fuck you. He doesn't care. But Damon tells a story about Tom Cruise, which is so in line with everything we know about this guy. So they had both made, I forgot whether they were just happening to have dinner because they were in the same town, they were shooting. But Damon tells a story that sometime just after Mission Impossible 3 had wrapped production. So right in and around when Damon would have been finishing Departed, it may have been something like that. Maybe they were together for an awards show, but they're having dinner. And there is a famous scene in Mission Impossible 3, which I think is fantastic, where Cruise does some kind of insane stunt on the side of a building where you can see it's him doing it. And it does not in any way look safe. So Damon tells a story that, hey, listen, I'm in the movie business, but I asked him, I didn't know how the fuck they did this. What did they do? How were you able to do this safely? And so Cruise super intensely, and Damon kind of does a Cruise impersonation. It's pretty good. He's like, well, look, Matt, I'll tell you. We had the Wrangler, we had the safety guy. And the safety guy, I went over the diagram, right? Almost like a character in a movie, but this is how he's telling Matt Damon the story. I went over the diagram of the shots that we were going to do, right? And the safety guy said, Mr. Cruise, we can't do this. We can't do this. There's at least a 30% chance that you'll fall to your death. And Matt Damon goes, the Cruise stops the story at that point. Matt Damon says, so what the hell did you do? And Tom Cruise, with a straight face, goes, I fired the safety guy. I fired the Wrangler. I brought in new people. I just did the stunt. So, yes, he's just an actor, but he is, and we've seen it in Mission Impossible, that insane motorcycle stunt, and some of the other crazy things hanging off the edge of a plane. And I know there was green screen, but there was still a risk. He's willing, a la Jackie Chan, who did different kinds of batshit crazy stunts, and suffered more injuries. Now, Cruise busted his ankle doing not as dangerous of a stunt as many of the other ones that he's pulled off without a hitch. I believe that was during Mission Impossible Fallout, but I'm not sure, where he basically jumped from one building to another, and he landed wrong, knew his ankle was busted, but true to form, he finished running and went through the rest of that particular shot before saying, okay, I think my ankle is shredded. We're going to have to stop for the day. So he's somebody who takes this very seriously, and how can you not respect that? Well, I shouldn't say how can you not respect that. I can respect that. So Cruise is the answer also to a very weird personal trivia question. If somebody, and I wouldn't have known this, I was just kind of playing around on the Internet Movie Database, checking things out. I've talked about this. The only time in my life where I consistently went to the movies was when I was in film school. So circa 1994 through 1997, I went to the movies frequently. I would say on average of probably 2 or 3 times a month, if not more. There were certain times where it was even more than that, where I would, on Friday was my day off when I was at NYU Film School. I typically went to the movies on Friday. It's just something that I did. So this is a roundabout way of saying that unlike other movie geeks, big movie fans, there are famous actors, and as I talked about in a previous podcast, famous even filmmakers like Christopher Nolan's of the world, not old heads again, where I didn't see a bunch of their movies in theaters when I probably should have. But I believe that Tom Cruise is the person in Hollywood whom I have seen the most consecutive movies of. And it's still not really that great of a number. There are other people that probably have seen at least 10 in a row. So I was just looking at this earlier. The first Tom Cruise, so Tom Cruise, his early career, I first became aware of him in the movie Taps. I knew who he was because he's in the movie and he makes an impression, but it's Tim Hutton's movie, Timothy Hutton, who was coming off an Oscar win for Robert Redford's Ordinary People, which famously, inexplicably, sorry, I love Robert Redford. The Natural is maybe one of my top 5 favorite movies ever. Raging Bull should have won Best Picture and Best Director. Oops, I said it out loud. Sorry, Bob. But Timothy Hutton did Taps. And Cruise is part of the supporting cast. He's very strong in that movie. The first movie where Cruise is like a lead is Risky Business, which is a great dark comedy. About as good as it gets in the realm of, are we supposed to laugh? This is a little nervy. This is a little over the edge. I'm not sure if we're supposed to laugh. Is he really in physical danger? Great movie. And I didn't see Top Gun in theaters. I don't think I went to the movies once in 1986, that year. Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. That's the one movie I saw in the year of Aliens and the year of Top Gun and the year of Crocodile Dundee. Another great one, right? But the first Tom Cruise movie that I actually saw in theaters, it's crazy to say this, A Few Good Men. I had not turned 19 yet. That was 1992, and I saw it just before Christmas, came out for the Oscar qualifying run, and it was nominated for numerous Oscars. Including Best Picture, but that was the year of Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. There was a chance that Neil Jordan, The Crying Game, Boy George, the song, there was a chance that was going to pull an upset, but it was Clint's time, and I was very happy with that. But so I saw A Few Good Men in theaters. Then I read John Grisham's The Firm. Everybody read that book. It just seemed like everybody was reading it. I didn't read the hardcover. Hardcover came out in 91. Summer, and a lot of people were reading that big hardcover. I read it, and Dad got the soft cover. I tore through it in a couple of days. Fantastic book. Movie's pretty good, Dad and I saw it in theaters. Wasn't as good as the book. We've heard that a million times, but a good movie. And then I saw Interview with the Vampire. Not a fan. Now I appreciate the artistry. It looks great. The actors are all terrific. Didn't love Stephen Ray's performance, but Banderas, I liked him. Of course, Kirsten Dunst. Brad's okay. Christian Slater's okay. And Cruise really carries the film. I didn't read the book. I knew there was controversy with Anne Rice before seeing the film when Cruise was cast. She said, I love Tom Cruise, but this is the worst casting in history. But then when she saw the movie, she apologized profusely. She said, I fucked up. Words to that effect. I'm sorry, Tom, you're amazing. I saw it on opening day and I was very let down. Maybe because I was expecting a different movie than what it ended up being, but it's the kind of movie I recommend, but I don't really like. If anybody says, is it worth it? Absolutely. It's worth it for the performances. It's worth it for the incredible production design. It's worth it for Kirsten Dunst. You want to know how she became a star? It's that movie if you haven't seen it. So then Cruise took a little bit of a break. And he came back with the first Mission Impossible, which, as I said, took a long time to get together, in part because he was part of the production team. And his hand-picked director was terrific, Brian De Palma, who I've talked about on previous podcasts. He had a lot of ups and downs, from Bonfire of the Vanities, Casualties of War, but he also had Scarface, and he had The Untouchables, and he was a filmmaker, Carlitos Way, that Cruise really loved his visual style. And even though Cruise gave De Palma a lot of, I don't want to say problems, but he was really working with him to keep the budget from going berserk, which is weird given that the later Mission Impossible movies, the budgets were always going to be, outsized and crazy. But the first Mission Impossible I also saw in theaters. That marks the fourth consecutive Tom Cruise movie that I saw in theaters. This is, again, 1996, summer. I enjoyed it. I was a little bit let down by it. I didn't understand the plot. The first time through, there's all of this kind of CIA gobbledygook that's being spoken in the first quarter of the film. I didn't understand it. It wasn't until I started to think about the plot and actually read about it. So, that whole thing at the beginning was a training exercise, but it wasn't really a training exercise. They ended up all getting bumped off. It seemed more complicated than it actually was. This whole operation was a mole hunt. Oh, now I get what that means. This was a decoy. It's a lot of gobbledygook. The film is good, though. People who are familiar with the later movies who go back and watch that one will probably be surprised by the kind of less gadgetry. It's more of a straightforward spy thriller, almost like a Bourne Identity in that realm. It has a grittiness that the later movies, which almost seem a little bit, the characters just kind of look too good. Even when they're dirty, they still look like models. You know what I mean? There is a grit and a dirt and a grime to the first Mission Impossible that I appreciate. So it's good. Again, I think every movie in the series is worth seeing. Some are just outright masterpieces. I think Mission Impossible 2 is probably the weakest one in the entire series. Andy Newton's okay. They really couldn't quite figure that one out. It's just okay. And then Cruise, what a big year he had in 96. Jerry Maguire. Saw that the day it opened with my dad. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And it was a movie that I had been looking forward to. I had read about it. Oh, this sounds cool. And, again, Cruise in that movie is actually playing older than he was at that time, which is interesting because, you look at him today. If you didn't know that he was 61, if he was just a random guy and you saw him from a distance, you'd probably think he's in his mid-40s. He sure as fuck doesn't look 61. At least not in anything I see. People say, well, Cruise is starting to show his age. Yeah, he's starting to show his age. He's 61. But guy looks fantastic. And the point with Jerry Maguire is I think his character's supposed to be 37, and he was 34 when the movie was shot. So I love Jerry Maguire. And I got to tell you, I remember at those Oscars, I was rooting for Tom to win Best Actor. I was rooting for him, Born on the 4th of July, 1990, to win, and he didn't win. Daniel Day-Lewis was a runaway train. That was Day-Lewis for My Left Foot versus Tom as Ron Kovic, Massapequa native, in Born on the 4th of July. So I hadn't even seen the movie at the time that the Oscars were on. I was rooting for Cruise just because Massapequa, I was rooting for Cruise. But when Jerry Maguire got a bunch of Oscar nominations, and that was a kind of a strange year for the Oscars, where most of the big awards the nominees were independent films. Even though to call The English Patient an independent film is a stretch because it had a lot of studio money, but technically it was an independent film. It was Miramax and Saul Zaentz who kind of did his own thing. Jerry Maguire was the big studio release that got a ton of acclaim. And I saw the movie shine. I liked it. My problem was Jeffrey Rush, fantastic actor, who's been in a lot of other great movies, Shakespeare in Love, Taylor of Panama. I thought that his role was not a big enough role to be Best Actor. As simple as that. I was not happy. Cruise, to his credit, he had to have been crushed when they announced Jeffrey Rush as winner. Because I think he thought he was going to win. I thought he was going to win. I said, man, I can't give it to Jeffrey Rush. He's in like 30 minutes of the movie. He's phenomenal in those 30 minutes, but no, didn't think he was going to win. Cruise, to his credit, when they announced Jeffrey Rush as the winner, he immediately stood up and gave the guy, he took part in the standing ovation. I don't know, I was impressed by that. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can flip the switch as quickly as Tom Cruise flipped it. And then the last movie of his that I saw in theaters, my sort of 6-movie run, was Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, which, if I'm being honest, Cruise wasn't miscast, but that part could have been played by anyone. That was not a Tom Cruise type of role. And maybe that's why he wanted to do it, in the same way that, why did Jim Carrey want to do Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? It seems to go against his strengths. Well, that's probably why he wanted to do it, because it's nothing like he had done before. But Eyes Wide Shut, I think, is a great film. But because it's Stanley Kubrick, it's not up to par of his best work. And there's really nothing for Cruise to do in that film other than he thinks he's taking action, but he's mostly just observing and reacting. It's not the kind of performance that he's given in a lot of other movies. Certainly the Mission Impossible movies, where he's literally driving the action, literally, figuratively, symbolically driving the action. Or a movie like Night and Day, which was really one of the few movies that should have been a bigger hit than it was, because almost every Cruise film has turned a profit, where he has been a central focus. That's why I don't count Magnolia, where he got a lot of acclaim for supporting actor Paul Thomas Anderson. The movie didn't really do that well at the box office. He's phenomenal in the film, though. It's one of his strongest performances. But Eyes Wide Shut was not really an actor's movie. Nicole does more heavy lifting than Tom. She goes through more sort of run gamut of emotions than Tom. You know, it's amazing that film is now, it's going to celebrate its 25th anniversary later this year. And that was a movie that had the longest production schedule, I think, in history. Think about this. My last semester at New York University was the fall of 1996. So Cruise basically pivoted from this huge year that he had, where he had Mission Impossible 1 and Jerry Maguire. He began work. They started shooting Eyes Wide Shut as Jerry Maguire was hitting theaters. I think it was a couple of weeks difference. I think they had started Eyes Wide Shut like early November of 1996. And I want to say that Jerry Maguire came out in later November, like around Thanksgiving. I'm not 100%. I'm almost positive it was fall 96. So he started work on Eyes Wide Shut in the fall of 1996, and the movie did not come out until July of 1999. That gives you an idea of how preposterous the shooting schedule was. And the fact that Stanley Kubrick passed in early 1999, it was March? It was either March or April, I'm pretty sure of that. It's 2.5 years later. It's not like Kubrick passed 6 months after they shot Eyes Wide Shut. The movie took so long to make because Kubrick's notorious perfectionism. They were just running it over and over and over. But again, to his credit, Cruise did nothing but lavish praise on Kubrick while Kubrick was around. And then when Kubrick passed, both he and Nicole, despite the divergent paths their lives took, they adored him. They absolutely adored him. Like a father figure. They spent so much time with him. You know, this kindly old Einstein-level genius filmmaker, Stanley Kubrick. So he's had so few outright failures in his career. That part of it makes him a huge outlier and almost a unicorn. Because, as I say, Clint Eastwood, who has been a major figure in Hollywood since, conservatively speaking, the mid-1960s, since 1964, 60 years, a star, a big star. But Clint has had a lot of disappointments. Even since his comeback with Unforgiven. I mean, Cry Macho, not that good. You know, The Mule was just okay. There are very few Tom Cruise movies where you don't have strong feelings. A lot of people, I mean, Vanilla Sky, I think, is not good. Should have been good. It doesn't get there. It's a romance, it's sci-fi, it's a mind fuck. Turned a profit, though. Paul McCartney, great song. I think it's a great song. Just the way he says the words Vanilla Sky in the song. Cruise is somebody, though, whose goal, and he's talked about it, is to give the audience their money's worth. Every role that he plays in every movie that he gets behind. You know, and there are plenty of roles that he was going to play and didn't because he wasn't sure either that the script was right or that he was right for the part. He never tried to force, except with Jack Reacher, where he wasn't the first choice and he just, whatever. But on movies that he was intensely involved in the production. The movie about Steve Prefontaine, which his production company was involved with, Without Limits. For those who don't know, Steve Prefontaine was a famous American distance runner. They ended up getting Billy Crudup, who is really strong in that role. The movie completely bombed. It didn't really get much play because there was another Steve Prefontaine film. Like, of all things, Hollywood came out with 2 Steve Prefontaine films at the same time. There was the movie Prefontaine with Jared Leto, future Suicide Squad Joker, Oscar nominee for Dallas Buyers Club. Really, really strong actor. That movie was not very good. Even though Jared Leto, with the kind of mutton chop type facial hair, he was a dead ringer for Steve Prefontaine. It looked like Steve Prefontaine, you could say, looked like Jared Leto. Billy Crudup, his performance, I think, is stronger. And the movie Without Limits, I highly recommend, especially if you know nothing about the life and times of Steve Prefontaine. The man was a quote machine. But Cruise felt that he was aged out of playing that role, and he did not fight it. He didn't push against it. He simply cast someone else. And there's been a lot of talk. See, this is where social media can sometimes be a negative. The story of Tom Cruise and Iron Man is way more involved than just Jon Favreau wanted him for Iron Man and it didn't work out and they went with Robert Downey Jr. That's true. That all happened. But Cruise started pondering Iron Man in the 90s, before the MCU, even before Wesley Snipes' Blade in 98, which you could argue was, even though it's a decade before Downey Jr. in Iron Man and Favreau, directed that. Cruise was kicking around Iron Man screenplays. That was his favorite comic book growing up. Again, according to what I've read about him, that was his favorite. I don't obviously know that. I don't have inside information. But the reason why the first attempts by Cruise didn't go, he didn't find a script that in his estimation, he could guarantee would work. It was as simple as that. He just didn't want to fight it. So they commissioned one screenplay after another for a kind of Iron Man origin story, like what we saw in the 2008 Robert Downey Jr. version, which was the trailblazer, pioneer, and the beginnings of the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that is. He didn't find a script that was as good as that in the time. And he commissioned a lot of writers got paid. He couldn't find it, so he stepped away at that time. And then in the mid-2000s, when things started to percolate, saying, hey, we can get this going, supposedly he wanted too much money, or who knows. Sometimes when actors price themselves out, it's because they don't like the script and don't want to tell people that they don't like the script. But that's neither here nor there. His career will not be defined by the movies he didn't make, but by the ones that he did. And the fact that with the release of Top Gun Maverick, it's kind of crazy because Top Gun Maverick was wrapped in, I believe, either the spring or the summer of 2019. So, way before anyone had ever heard of COVID-19. But when that movie originally was supposed to come out Memorial Day of 2020, like if you go back and you could somehow see ads on the internet, on YouTube, from like November of 2019, December of 2019, even January of 2020, the film was done. It was wrapped. And then when COVID hit, there was a lot of pressure from the studio. We got to just send this to streaming and we can, when theaters reopen, we can put it in theaters and we can try to do it that way. Cruise, one of the producers, he stood on his head. He said, there's no reason to do this. This is better than the first one. I think we really knocked this out of the park. People are going to love seeing Val, whatever it was that he said specifically. But he fought for that movie to not go to streaming, to wait another year if they had to, and put it out in theaters and give it a full release before it hit any streaming services. And Tom Hanks, another enormous star, made a movie called Greyhound, and he was not able to do the same thing as far as convince the powers that be to keep it off of streaming. It ended up hitting Apple Plus. I mean, that's just the way that it goes. Sometimes things work out. Sometimes they just don't, And in the case of Cruise and Top Gun Maverick, he put himself on the line because he could have been wrong. The audience may not have been there, but the movie was so good that so many people thought it was so good. Like that's not the kind of film that is normally getting multiple crazy numbers of Oscar nominations. But it did. And I was just going to look up. I don't know how many Oscar nominations it got. I know that it was up for Best Picture, and I think that Cruise was up for Best Actor. Not sure about that. Knew either way, he wasn't going to win. The point was, it ended up exceeding every measure, every expectation that the studios had, that the prognosticators had, probably even that Tom Cruise himself had. And I've seen the film 3 times now. It's way better than the original. And listen, I'm a Generation Xer, and I love Top Gun for what it does. The Reagan era, all of that, fantastic. You know, summer of '86, you have that version of rah-rah pro-America Reagan era stuff. And then Stallone in Cobra, which came out the same summer. I think the 2 movies were in theaters from a different angle, very similar. Rah-rah. Let's get those bad guys, even if they're serial killers. In the case of Top Gun, let's blow those Russians out of the sky, right? But it is a true statement to say that if you argue that Cruise is the last movie star, as I say, I'm going to say Clint Eastwood, but Cruise is a bigger star. Like if we look at the career and we look at the number of movies that were enormous hits, the answer is Cruise. You know, Clint has had a different kind of career because of his filmmaking acumen. The number of really great movies where he doesn't appear. You know, Cruise as producer doesn't have a ton of films in which he doesn't appear. Again, it's neither here nor there. But at age 61, he is still at the top of the Hollywood mountain. And I was really excited when there was all the talk of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And I remember having a lot of conversations with Kenny, may he rest in peace. Kenny was convinced that Cruise was going to play a variant of Iron Man in that film. I was hoping for it. Now, if it was going to be something on the order of John Krasinski getting 30 seconds as Reed Richards before he gets, essentially stretched and murdered, a tough way to go, then I'm glad he wasn't in it. I would not have wanted to see Tom Cruise as superior Iron Man, whatever the fuck it was going to be, just get destroyed by the Scarlet Witch in 3 seconds. No, it wouldn't have worked. Pass, do not recommend. So I'm glad that he wasn't in it if that's how it was going to play out. Because I feel like that's the scene that his variant of Iron Man would have been in, so I'm glad he didn't do it. Now, if they did something crazy, because there's a lot of talk about Secret Wars, and is Downey Jr. going to come back? How are they going to work that? Now, if you told me right now that Tom Cruise was going to play Iron Man in Secret Wars, because presumably it's in a different timeline, whatever, sign me up. Because that really is a role. Robert Downey Jr. was born to play Iron Man, the kind of ladies' man. I hate to say it, substance abuser, but his character drinks a lot. But Cruise also, that's the kind of part that was written for Tom Cruise. So I'm trying to think, did I see any other Tom Cruise movies in theaters? I don't think that I did. I think I just had that run of 6. It's so wacky the way these things work out. Like, I should have seen Minority Report. I'm a Spielberg guy. I love Steven Spielberg. By that point in time, I just, the 2002, 2003 era, I wasn't really going to the movies. So I didn't see that. As I say, I didn't see War of the Worlds in theaters. Or The Last Samurai. A lot of people will argue to this day that Last Samurai is, one of Tom's kind of great, not really under the radar because the film was a hit, but there was chatter at the time that he might get nominated for Best Actor. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I forgot. I saw Collateral. Michael Mann's Collateral, just about 20 years ago. I saw that in theaters. Loved it. Great to see Tom playing a villain. And, he was in his early 40s, but the salt and pepper hair, it worked. He really sold it. Like his character, Vincent, forgot what his last name was. But, there was kind of a running gag that maybe it's the kid that he plays in The Color of Money, the Scorsese film from the same year as Top Gun, 1986. The pool thing didn't work out, and now he's a hired gun. Now he's an assassin. But yeah, I saw Collateral in theaters, and I didn't see Edge of Tomorrow. I did not see Top Gun Maverick in theaters. I didn't see Jack Reacher. So yeah, I didn't see Night and Day. And I love Night and Day. Night and Day is one of those movies that if it's on, I can always watch it. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. Cruise's character is supposed to be like Ethan Hunt, who is a lethal agent in his own right, despite all the humor and stuff. but he's basically Ethan Hunt on drugs. Like Ethan Hunt on every kind of drug imaginable, where he's indestructible. He's essentially a superhero. He gets out of situations where you say, well, he can't get out of this, even more so than Ethan Hunt. But Cameron Diaz fucking kills it in Night and Day. Movie's worth seeing, just for her, if nothing else. Didn't see Oblivion in theaters. Oh, Edge of Tomorrow, another movie I absolutely adore. I can watch that. And they've been talking about, with Emily Blunt, they've been talking about a sequel for quite some time. Don't know if it's ever gonna get made. I mean, are they gonna do a Top Gun 3? Are they gonna have one more movie with Cruise and then phase him out? Who knows? But the market is there, because part 2, the way that it ended, the rah-rah of the ending, the kind of redemption for both of the main characters, it's just everything in that movie worked. Even John Hamm said, well, I wish my character wasn't such an asshole for so much of the movie, but his character works. And being able to bring Val back, I love Val Kilmer, and even seeing him in this sort of weakened state and knowing what happens to his character. But it was believable within the context of the first film, what we know about Iceman. Kazansky, is that he was a guy who was a team player. He was a guy who was going to play ball. And the Glenn Powell character in Top Gun Maverick is kind of supposed to be like Iceman in the original, but he doesn't seem like as much of an actual team player. See, Val Kilmer's character comes across like a dick in most of Top Gun, but he's not. He's legitimately not okay with the risks that Pete Mitchell, aka Maverick, takes. So it's more believable that guy would have advanced through the ranks of the United States military, as opposed to Pete Mitchell, aka Maverick, who was called Maverick because he did his own thing. He was always going to do his own thing, as we saw in the movie, stealing this, stealing that, disobeying orders repeatedly. That's just who he was. That's how he rolled. So with that, we've reached the end of episode 62 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for joining me once again here on this Friday night in New York. If you're checked out episode 62 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Or if you caught episode 62 in the audio format on Spotify, iTunes, or the other platforms, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. I'll be back with episode 63 real soon. Peace.